on YouTube. So I'm going to do that again. Click.
Okay.
See, now we'll see if the click came through. And we're live. It is Saturday, which is a big relief. February 6th, 2021, 5:01 p.m. And Kate's gotten up and gone away.
I'm here. I'm just setting up my light.
No, I'm just teasing you, Kate.
There we go.
Kate has been awake and working on her New Yorker piece for days and days in a row. She's completely fed up with life. So we are going to have Frustrated Kate Day. Because Kate is not allowed to have fun anymore, and she's never allowed to be done with her New Yorker article.
It turns out that that's like a feature. That's like a thing you don't know. Oh, look, I just that this is a feature of New Yorker articles. They never tell you is that they exist in perpetuity, and they just like keep happening, and you're like kind of given this idea that they're going to get published, and then they just keep moving it, and like it just doesn't happen.
Yeah,
so now it's happening, but
forever.
Yeah.
But, so were you more miserable when it wasn't happening, or are you more miserable now that it is?
Great question. It's kind of like, is the pain of like a burst appendix better or worse than like the pain of surgery? I don't know. Like, you know that the surgery will fix everything, but like it's also kind of more acutely painful than whatever was happening before. I don't know.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
I think.
But
I think that's
this is not just. I want to be clear. I'm not maligning the New Yorker. Like this is every piece that I ever major piece that I write. There's just like this period, isn't there? Like, I don't know how people are.
So the only thing that has ever gotten me over this, I used to be like this about every piece I ever wrote. And then two things happened. The first was I wrote an editorial every day for 9 years.
Yeah, I love this. I love that you did that.
And I mean, yeah, it was probably 4 days a week on average. But basically it was you would wake up every morning thinking you had to write an editorial.
Can we talk more about that today?
Sure.
Keep talking about it now, but I just love this.
And there is nothing like that experience for getting over the anxiety about writing, and also getting over the, anxiety about errors. Because if you do that, by the way, you make some mistakes. You get some things just dead ass wrong, and people call you on it. And now I write breezily and easily. The second thing that happened that really helped me get over fear of writing big pieces was lawfare. And this is for a different reason. I write less for lawfare than I did for the Washington Post, at least now. There was a time I was writing a shitload for lawfare, but my average output is much longer but less frequent. But here's the thing. If I make a mistake in lawfare, I just change it. And so I have no anxiety about errors. Because, the worst that'll happen is I make a mistake and then I change something. The worst that'll happen is I send somebody an apologetic note and say, oh, yeah, I'll fix that. I'm sorry I spelled your name which should have been spelled S-M-I-T-H. I'm sorry I spelled it A-S-S-H-O-L-E. But, and I'm deeply sorry. Please forgive my autocorrect. So I like that combination, the combination of just doing it every day for years and years and years, and then that plus just the ability to fix everything when it goes wrong was amazingly healthy.
So can we just let's just, we've never talked about this on In Lieu of Fun. I think just the two of us shooting the shit about our respective writing careers, and you have a much more lengthy and storied one than I do.
Yeah, but you have a tenure track job and I do not.
But yes, but so we have different concerns. It's very true. And I'm also I had a really weird kind of start, not weird, but it was an interesting start in journalism. And then I made some big mistakes, I definitely did, and learned from them, and I am just completely obsessed with never printing a mistake or printing something where a person feels like, even feels like, I'm not like talking about like someone says something and they know what they meant and I know what they meant and I publish what they meant and they're angry at me for publishing it. That I'm fine with. I'm upset about the idea of like, they told me something and they really legitimately thought that they were telling me one thing and I misunderstood them even and like published it in this other kind of way or whatever. I think that there's like, I think that there's this part of me about like history that I really take it seriously to kind of get the record down about what people say. And that like I know that even when it seems like it's going to be some like something that you wrap fish up in the next day, that there's also going to be some grad student in like 200 years that is digging through it, hopefully not on microfiche anymore, but on something else. Like, and
piped directly into their heads,
Bluetooth
connected to the, yeah.
And I just kind of like, I know that this is not necessarily, not like a normal thing that journalists talk about, but it's very important to me that I feel like when people say things, I say them back to them and that we understand what they said collectively meant X. And I just don't like, does that make sense? Is that like a naive thing to say?
Yes and yes, it makes sense, and it's a naive thing to say.
Okay.
Because here's the thing. You're dealing with grown-ups who are also very thin-skinned. And that's the nature of the kind of people that you're writing about and the kind of organizations that you're writing about. And so if you have a total meeting of the minds about what's being said and they don't like it when it comes out, they will treat it as though it was a mistake on your part, even if it wasn't. Even if it was, what really happened is they made a mistake and said something they shouldn't have said. And so, the idea that, so the extreme example of this, of course, is Donald Trump and Maggie Haberman, right? Where he talks to her, he says things, and then he accuses her of writing fake news when she records what he says. Look, I think, that's an extreme sort of pathology case of it. But I think it's an example of something that happens much more typically all the time, which is, people in the heat of the moments in a good conversation with a good reporter say all kinds of things that then when they're written down and situated against a lot of other facts, they're unhappy that they said or unhappy that the reporter got them to say, or however you want to frame it. And so they will contain the damage as they see it, which is almost always less damage than they think, but they will contain the damage by suggesting that there's some factual problem with what was reported. And sometimes that can be purely contextual, as in, I don't deny what it's quoted, but it's out of context, right? Suggesting that if you had merely been fairer, sometimes it's framed as, Kate Klonick screwed me on this. I never said blank, even though there's a tape of you saying blank. And sometimes
I don't care about it at all. Like, I'm like, as long as they're, yeah, sorry.
Or I never meant blank, right? I never meant to say, I don't believe that X, Y, and Z. What I said was that because A, B, and C, then X, Y, and Z would be a logical conclusion, right? Let's sort of throw up smoke, and sometimes it's throwing up smoke because you actually believe that you shouldn't have said it, and therefore you probably didn't say it, or at least you didn't mean it, or at least... and so I don't think there's a way in good reporting to avoid subsequent disputes about factual matters. I think it's the nature of the fact that if I...
And you have to be able to burn all of your access and all of your sources if someone says something that is like truthful, and you feel like you have to report it and it needs to be reported, and like it's going to completely, like, it means like maybe you're never going to have access to this place again, or like whatever else.
Right. And that's fine. I mean, there's no, like, the only people who should have long-term access to a company or to, are its own PR department.
Yeah.
And so I don't think the relevant standard should be, is there any dispute about accuracy? I think the relevant standard should be, and functionally is it accurate? And, the most accurate, worthwhile things I've ever written have all been contested. Because they were important. They get contested.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, I think disputes about accuracy are only secondarily a function of actual questions of the inaccuracy of the reporting. They're primarily a question of people getting caught like deers in the headlights, having something unflattering reported about them, or something that may be perfectly flattering. They just would rather not be out there.
Have it, yeah.
Yeah,
I don't have tolerance. Like, there's no tolerance for, yes. I mean, like, there's something really fundamental about journalism, though, as like a first principles type of thing, which is like, one, like, don't lie. And I'm like, and that means like in all of the ways, don't misrepresent like who you are, don't misrepresent what you're doing, like, and why you're like here to tell this story or like what's going on, and then like don't misrepresent what happens in that, and like report it duly without fear of repercussion to you personally as a journalist in some type of way. I just think that that's like it's actually a very simple, it feels like a very simple ethical quandary to me. And I think this is in part because of my parents and like the judicial, like kind of like they were always on judicial ethics committees and like were very rigid about like not talking about certain cases and like never talking. I don't know. Some of these things just always seemed like very clear to me. Like you just like, this is like, you just don't do this and you do this.
But it's true in judging, too. I mean, when a judge makes a finding of fact, that finding of fact may be more or less supported by the record, and somebody is perfectly entitled to say, oh, Judge Kate Klonick made the following factual findings, but that's because she ignored this part of the record because she's a nincompoop. And somebody can say that and does say that almost invariably, and in fact a basis for appeal is, usually subject to some heightened abuse of discretion standard, but the judge's findings were based on an inappropriate assessment of the facts.
So I'm gonna take a second to switch gears and make you talk about, you said that like the 9 years of writing a daily column changed your entire relationship with writing. Let's talk about that like a little bit more. Like you say that you teach an op-ed class, and like I also kind of sometimes like do little seminars and like how I pitch op-eds. And I have this just very distinct memory of being like 22 and being told about pitching and like literally not knowing what that word meant, and like being very intimidated by the entire idea of it. And I think that like now, as like I'm like 30, how old am I? 36, and you're older than me.
51.
That there is like, but I mean like you probably, I mean like pitching.
I don't pitch.
No, but no one pitches. Like, so here's the thing, is that like if you are a cub reporter, if you are a newbie into the scene, you have no connections, and this is something that is, I think, completely not talked about in journalism, and it should be talked about more openly, which is that it is a tribal community, and there are people who are like know each other and trust each other and have worked with each other, and then know that those people are good and can be trusted, and then will recommend them to other things or whatever. And so your reputation builds, and then you have to prove less and less in some type of initial pitch. But if you are 22 and trying to get published, like that is never going to happen in like the New York Times op-ed, because it doesn't matter how good your pitch is, you're just like not going to have the gravitas. And like there are just like, this is like kind of the slightly undemocratic part of, in my opinion, of journalism.
Yeah. So look, the journalism is both the most and the least democratic intellectual profession that there is. It's the most in the sense that you are one if you declare yourself one. There's no license to practice.
Yep.
And there really are these people who, you know, just start writing and do it well. And some of them, I mean, you know, Olivia Nuzzi, I don't think she ever finished high school. You know,
really?
And she certainly never went to college. She started doing journalism when she was a high school sophomore and just kind of never stopped. And she wrote cool stuff and people took her seriously, and she had developed amazing sources and access. And by the time she was 22 or 23, she was, you know, writing features for New York Magazine, where I think she works now. And, you know, she's, like, those stories exist, and they're real, and there's a lot of them. And they don't, you know, people think that it's a creature of old journalism, and now all the journalists are, you know, the same people who would otherwise be going to Yale Law School. There's a bit of truth to that, too, actually, that, you know, it's a more elite profession than it used to be. It used to be kind of like the working class intellectual profession, and that is certainly less true than it used to be. But it's also the case that it you know, you can scratch your way into it with nothing more than grit and capability and willingness to go out and put yourself out there and do reporting and find interesting stories if you can find interesting stories. It is also the case that something has to be the surrogate for credentials, and what it turns out ends up being that a lot of the time is, as you just described, your network. And so there is a social dimension to it, to acquiring the right people to call when you have an idea, and to collecting that is oddly not that different from, you know, making sure
like
you're
anything.
with the right professor in, you know, do RA work for the right professor in your graduate program, right? I mean, there's a weird quality that you've having eliminated the status stuff, you then have to recreate it, so you do. And I think and ironically, we are pretty bad at figuring out who the people are who are just bad at that stuff but are really good at the other stuff.
Yeah, it's true.
And so, like, I think it's got pros and cons, honestly. I don't know what I would have done without it, because I was a terrible student and was never going to go to graduate school. So it was really good for me, but I am
Charm them with your French horn, Ben.
Yeah, I just would walk down the street with a French horn under my arm, and everybody would want to talk to me about it. You know, I don't know what I would have done without it, but I'm also aware that there are people who are just as talented as I am, who have sort of 85% of the skill set that I have, but the part of it that they don't have is kind of being good at getting in people's faces, introducing yourself to people, and making sure that they have access to your work.
Oh, I wouldn't even say that. I would just say, like, I'm not good at getting in people's faces, but I am, like, I'm just, like, it's remarkable how much of, like, the getting your ideas out there is about, okay, like, I would say 5% having a good idea. That actually is, like, probably solidly what I'd say. 5% of getting published in a good place with an idea is like having a good idea, like a solid idea. Doesn't even need to, which means to say that it doesn't need to be there. And the rest of it is like kind of all about how you package it and how you frame it and like how you kind of sell it. And like, so I'm not trying to make it sound like it's a sales pitch. It's not a sales pitch, but it is kind of like this kind of, that it is this like relationship of like being like, here is this expertise that I have. Here is what I can add. And here is the news that I'm going to hang on it to make my expertise relevant in some way. And here is the takeaway, which is like how this is all going to matter in some important way, given my expertise and my opinions on things and everything else. And I think that's like basically, I think that's basically an op-ed, right?
So this is a critical point, and Ann Kay has just flagged it in the chat. A huge part of the issue is people who have an intuitive understanding of how to frame things and people who don't.
Yes.
So there are people who are super, super good at research and who have all these incredibly interesting ideas and knowledge, and they don't know how to frame a project.
Yes.
And I have a friend who I grew up with who is an extreme example of this. I mean, just an incredible, diligent, thoughtful researcher who has no idea how to frame a project. And the result has never done, actually, a significant project. Is one of the most broadly, diversely educated people I've ever met, but can't actually frame something out about it.
It's its own skill. And I think they don't teach it. No one teaches it. It's like this thing that you're supposed to pick up. It's not a thing that is taught.
And maybe it's not easily teachable, but let's take your current project as an example. Mm-hmm. So I think there are a lot of people, and stop me if I'm revealing more information about the project than I should be, though I think you've been pretty upfront about what you're doing. There are a lot of people who would say, or there are at least some people who would say, Facebook's setting up this oversight board. I want to write an article about it. Mm-hmm. There are many fewer people who early on would say, what if I kind of embed myself in this process over a very long period of time? On the theory that there is a new adjudicative mechanism being created here that flows out of my some of the writing I've been doing about, the new governors and that sort of stuff, that I can kind of study in real time the creation of this institution. Now, that is a self-tasking over a long period of time that quite leave aside the quality of the reporting you do or whatever. That's the hard part, right? Like, the rest is execution.
Yep.
But, like, having the instinct, so everybody has the instinct now. Jesus, wish we knew more about the Facebook Oversight Board. Be great to have some reporting about the Facebook Oversight Board. Wow, the Facebook Oversight Board's going to issue some opinions. Maybe we should take a look at it. And maybe we should yell and scream about Evelyn Dweck. There's that's easy.
Yep.
But having the instinct a year and a half, 2 years ago, hey, this thing may be actually getting on the ground. Let's study it. That is a self-tasking that is extremely difficult and very difficult to teach. And I always...
that is like self-tasking. No one's ever put it that way. Thank you also for giving that words. I
have another word for you.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna get a notebook and something that I scribbled down at 4:00 in the morning and show it to you.
It's another Wittis coinage. So the other thing that people So because self-tasking is basically untaught, you have this whole, it's multiple generations of people now who are really good at curricula and really good at syllabuses, because these are things that you're expected to read. These are the things that the assignments you're expected to do. This is the day on which you will be tested. And so they actually go through college or graduate school, and I know what Anne Kornhauser is thinking right now, and I'm going to come to the dissertation in a moment. They go through college and graduate school and never have to self-task.
Yes.
And so then, if you're a lawyer, you actually go through graduate school and you never have to do it, because you come out and you're a law professor, or you're a legal scholar, a law school graduate, and you've actually really never had to self-task. So you don't even know that you're not good at it. And then here's what happens.
It's so fascinating to me. Like, I'm like, how are you defining self-tasking?
I'm saying a big project that you assign yourself, you conceive of, you've framed out yourself, and is going to be really good for you to have done. Like what you have done the last couple of years, for example. And the first time this really hits people in the face in our community is when they decide to go on the academic market, and then they have to write a law review article. And that is, they've never done anything like it. Now you have to write a 75-page article, and it has to actually say something. And that hits them like a ton of bricks. In other disciplines, traditional social sciences, history, it's when you have to write a dissertation. Yeah, and right. You go, right. you your whole life you've been doing the reading that you've been assigned. You've been doing mini kind of projects, papers, or whatever. But the papers are usually assigned. And then all of a sudden, you're like, okay, write a book.
Yeah.
And this is the craziest methodology. I mean, I can't.
No, it makes no sense. I don't even think it trains you for nothing.
It's such a crazy way to do it, because you have no training along the way in the self-tasking aspects of it. How do you define a larger project that's actually worth doing? And so
then you know the story in which, like, I did my PhD and they literally failed me for, like, the new governor's piece. I mean, to be fair, it was...
There you go! And you only got it published in the Yale Law Journal.
That was Harvard Law Review, but, like, yeah, same difference.
I'm terribly sorry.
I know, I'm very sorry. But seriously, like, I'll never forget this. There was, like, this... this is actually a really fun story. So I am just completely... Like, Ben, this goes back to some of our early stuff. In Lieu of Fun, when we talked about imposter syndrome, because that was like kind of a thing that we were still talking about. And
yeah, it's hard to be an imposter when you never leave your house, because it's
just gonna say that you're like, who are you fronting for? But there's but seriously, and so we had talked about this, and like when I got to Yale, I had finished up my Second Circuit clerkship, which sounds conceited. But I actually had no confidence in myself. Did not think that I had ever deserved to have a Second Circuit clerkship and all this.
That's because you went to Georgetown.
Yeah.
And you were self-conscious about that.
I was. And I was like, oh, so like a...
But so many... You don't know how many Georgetown students have pointed to your career and been like, she went to Georgetown, right? Because, and I, like, it's like... People have have Georgetown pride in you.
Really?
Oh yes.
I literally.
I could even bring people on in Lieu of Fun who were like excited to learn that you went to Georgetown.
That's very sweet. But there's I will just say that I got to Yale. I felt like, oh, okay, I went around and did all of these kind of meetings with people and about my projects, and I just didn't know what I was doing. I didn't even have an idea at that point that what I was doing is building a career to be an academic. I just was like, I like writing papers. Okay, so that's like a thing I do. So like I don't know. It was like I was feeling in my life like one year at a time. I just like I didn't have like a huge like vision. I just knew I didn't want to work for a firm or something that made me miserable. And so but I will say that like I started off writing about intellectual property at Yale, and I thought that I was going to write about intellectual property and the Yale ISP, the Information Society Partnership with Jack Balkin, was like at that point a very like IP friendly and all about IP because internet law at the very outset was like very about IP. And I kind of was like, well, I'm going to write about this trade dress article. I have this whole thing. And everyone was like, this is so boring. I mean, I just really feel like everyone was like, this is so boring. And I was so bored by it, I couldn't even write it. I couldn't even read all of the trademark treatises that I'd like checked out of the library. I just like couldn't do it. And at some point, the shaming stuff happened, and I decided to write about shaming. And then I just kind of kept going. And like when I decided to write about this, I just will never forget. I will never forget. Like there were like these two professors that I was in the seminar with, and they were like the seminar professors for like the first year in the PhD program. And I submitted there were three of us in the program. There were three people. And I submitted my proposal and my initial draft, and they failed it. And looking back, I'm like, good for you. If you think that that was a failing proposal, like that's fine. We just have different concepts of what legal academia is going to be. And they were just like, this is not law. This is not about a legal concept. This is
right. And how many
structure.
of those people would now decline to sit on the oversight board on the basis that whatever it's doing, it has nothing to do with law?
Yeah, exactly. Not people that are at Columbia or on the trustees board or like whatever. So
Yeah,
like
and also those people are not being asked to write in the New Yorker about law.
no, but like they failed the paper. But I want to say this for a second because I actually think it's super important. And I know that it's not exactly like I decline from like expressing my humanity on this show at any point, but like I will never forget. I was in this apartment and it was the summer after my first year in the PhD program, and they had failed my paper, and I'd had conversations with them about how to revise it and what to do. And I was still gathering information, like on writing the paper. And I laid down on the floor and sobbed and sobbed and sobbed and completely broke down. And John was like, you have to get up and you have to keep writing this paper. And the only way to prove these assholes wrong is to finish your paper. And like that was like the best
Good
advice
advice.
that I've ever
Yeah.
gotten in my entire life. And
Well,
it was
I
like
can beat you on this one, Kate Klonick, because when I was 16, I failed the Maryland State Functional Writing Exam. The first year
what?
that it was a requirement for graduation from Maryland, from any high school in Maryland. And I took it, and we had to write a business letter to somebody asking for permission to write something. And I wrote a business letter to that person asking for permission for something based on the facts in the prompt. And about a year later, I got back that I had failed the exam, and therefore was not going to be allowed to graduate unless I passed it on second administration. And so, as a junior in high school, I had to retake the Maryland State Functional Writing Test. Me and about
you of all people. Like,
yes, who was only a few years from becoming a professional writer, but I did in fact fail it. And here's the best part: on second administration, I passed with the lowest possible passing score. So I came like this close to failing again.
I know people don't want to share these types of stories because it does compromise them. It makes them look like, oh, maybe they are an imposter.
Maybe they are actually an imposter.
But like,
I could tell you that there's another in lieu of fun guest. There's an in lieu of fun guest whom I went to high school with who came this close to failing it as well. Since several people I went to high school with have been on the show, I'm not going to say more information than that. But we might have been lab partners in high school together.
I would also have said, oh wait, that guy. I also have spent I will say that I have spent oh god, have I already told you my story of how I took the how I passed the, what is it called? I forget what it is for lawyers, but it was like the ethics, the professional ethics. I think.
Oh, did you fail professional ethics? That's why you're so unethical.
Yeah, no, I did the first time. I failed it the first time. But then
that's why you always get the ethical questions right, but the second time you exhaust unethical options
but I'm
first.
Actually super proud of this. So
I'm going to start bringing in questions while you.
But the second time that I took it, okay, so you remember that I go to Montana or went to Montana before the pandemic regularly to work on this farm. And I started that before I went to law school. And so from 2009 until 2019, every summer I spent 2 to 3 weeks on this farm doing garlic harvesting and other things. But, that was through bar exam and everything else. And, MPRE, that's what it is. And so I passed the they basically picked, I decided to take the MPRE, and then the only place to take it in order to be able to qualify for the bar exam, with my bar exam results coming out and be able to get barred, was I'd have to be in Montana. So I took it in Montana, and which meant that I borrowed my friend on the farm's car. And I drove all the way, and she was like, hey, well, as long as you're going all the way to Missoula, can you pick up this box full of kittens? Because we have a mouse problem in the barn, and so we need to get some more cats. And so we are going, can you get this box full of kittens? And I was like, yes, obviously I can get you this box full of kittens. This is the least hardship that you've ever put on me. And so she gave me her car. I showed up to take this thing at the Emperor. I'm sitting in the Emperor for 3 hours then. And I'm box full of kittens. Is this ethical? Box full of kittens. It's I cannot concentrate at all. It was terrible. I went to get the box full of kittens. The person had let the box full of kittens go. They were semi-feral. They were all over the place. We scrounged them together. I got 2 box full of kittens into the car. They then sat on my head and on my chest for the entire drive back to where we were. But that was how I passed the MPRE by 1 point. So I was that's fine.
Yeah, that's the thing about passing by the lowest possible score is you still passed.
Exactly.
Anne Kornhauser, your background.
My weekend best.
Your background sounds like Alice Lee's today.
Yeah.
Really? Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, no, you're. There's it's like Alice's refrigerator has taken over your.
Sorry.
No problem.
Oh, anyway, I think it's the fan.
So you were had something. You were talking about something in the chat about which I said, let's talk about this, and I completely forget what it was.
The thing I found most difficult about journalism, from an ethical perspective anyway, was and I remember this happening with Nan Aaron, actually, whom I really liked, and who's, an advocate for liberal judges, let's say. She said something that she then later regretted having said, that I published it anyway because she said it on the record, and it was, not unimportant. And it wasn't the only time it happened. I just remember that particular, and it was one of the reasons I was just kind of unhappy as a journalist. This notion that, people, we all do this, right? We all regret having said things sometimes.
So my question is, why is that any different from being a historian? Where you're working with records that may include things that people would have rather not be ever looked at or written about by a historian. How is it different?
Yeah, the people are there. you have a relationship with your sources, right? One does. And then you have to deal with the fact that they feel betrayed or used or whatever. I would say that's one difference.
No, it's a huge
Just
difference.
the human part of it.
There's a human part of it. And this is what I meant by the naivete of my I'm like, is this naive of me? I think that there are relationships that are very that are power dynamics, and there are relationships that are just person to person relationships. And when you're a journalist, just kind of I just feel here's what I here's what I hate. I just think that there shouldn't be a whole lot of gotcha journalism.
Exactly.
Most things shouldn't be gotcha journalism, because most things should be that you said something and you were a fucking idiot, but you said it, and you said it in front of a journalist, and that journalist was transparently a journalist and was obviously there and said this, that you said this thing, or that that there is a kind of a reduction of what was said.
Yeah, no, that's really good.
Yeah, does that
I would
make
just
sense?
say I would just expand on it a tiny bit and to answer Ben's question from a different angle. And I'm sure you both have this, right? When I say relationships, I mean that the reason Nan or whoever said something to me that they later regretted was because it was as though, I wouldn't say we were friends in that conversation, but we were comfortable. They were comfortable in that conversation, right? So it's different than a politician getting up in front of a press conference or even in an interview.
There's an understanding. I think that people think that they are comfortable in a situation because they're comfortable and they trust you and you are trustworthy, and they've had other conversations with you, that it obviates your professional obligations.
So I want to say I am totally bloodless about this. Maybe it's because you guys are just better people than I am. But look, and I say this with respect to Nan Aaron, genuine respect. She's a very long time serious advocate for a point of view on an important set of issues. But Nan Aaron is a professional. And what you're describing is that a professional screwed up. And as a result, you got you got information that not that you shouldn't have had, that she shouldn't have let you have. And this is not a failing on your part, a moral failing or a professional failing. It's a failing on her part. And I am sure that when I have not read a word of Kate's story, I am sure when it comes out, there will be people who are irritated with themselves over things that they said. And by the way, I have had profiles written of me where I was irritated at myself for things that I said. And, you get a little too comfortable. You like the journalist a little bit too much. You kind of let your guard down in certain ways. Okay, that's on me. I'm a pro, and part of the professional response is to try to make the journalist feel guilty about it.
Very fair point.
But I think you're internalizing way too much of that. I
agree.
The only time in my career I have ever felt bad about, I gotta say this in a way that cures it of names. The only time in my career I have ever felt bad about asking a bunch of questions, it wasn't even under false pretenses, it was just letting people assume I was more sympathetic than I was. Was a situation in which I was behaving much more like a historian than it was a story about a war criminal who had made it to the United States, and I did not publish the thing until after he was dead, not because I was above it, but because he died in the middle of my reporting of it. And and his family was very upset at me. And so to everybody in the chat who's saying dead people don't get upset at you, yeah, but their daughters do. And
there's always going to be people who are upset at you.
I agree with both of you. I guess what I learned was that maybe my personality, I wasn't going to be the kind of ruthless reporter that I knew would be,
Well, none of us are Danny Kleiman,
Right. Well, or Issakoff, right?
I'm literally never going to be that. Like, I just don't have an interest in. I do not have an interest in living my life like that. It is a conscious decision to go against people that you pretended to be friends with, or you pretended to be something else. I just can't do it. I'm not I just don't want to do it. That's not and so.
Look, it's a person. Look, I don't do it either. Actually, I haven't been a reporter in 20 years, and I did eventually migrate into something that didn't involve that in the same way, and part of it is that reason. But I also, but I also don't feel a lot of sympathy for. It's totally different when you're talking about normal people who aren't professionals in the space.
Absolutely.
But, then there's a sensitivity that you owe them just as a matter of humanity and whatnot. But the Nan Arons of the world, and again, I say this with affection for her and respect. Yeah, but it's her job not to say things that she shouldn't say, and I think she would agree with me about that, actually. All right. Thanks, Anne. Daniel Burge.
It's been a really fun conversation.
Yeah, it's a good conversation. He's back in his chair, but with a blue shirt.
Throwing us off as ever.
Today, so.
Well, you need to get a shirt that is actually the same color green as the chair. And I think that should be your in lieu of fun.
We need to stop talking about the chair. We just
never.
We just
never.
Need Daniel. Daniel.
So
hi, Daniel.
Hello. So Chris suggested I put this question in the chat. How did you go about training yourself in law, Ben?
Yeah, that is a great question. I would love to know that. Tell us more, Ben.
I don't quite know the answer to that question.
I don't really think that you do either. I was hoping you'd say that.
I think there's
weird discrepancies in your legal training that I pick up on as a lawyer, and even when you know so much more than me about constitutional law or federal space and the DOJ, but there's weird things that you say every once in a while that I'm there's some type of
that show that I've never taken property.
A little bit,
yeah.
I'm sorry, a little bit. I'm guy never went through 1L.
Yeah, no, that's true. And to this day, I could not pass finals in 1L in certain areas without actually spending a lot of time preparing for them. So there's three answers to this question. The first is I did it in the opposite direction that almost everybody does. I started with litigation documents back when, and this will ring a bell for Anne, who I'm sure did the same thing when she was working at Legal Times, but a huge amount of what we did was we covered litigations. And so the result is you start with a lot of civil and criminal procedure, but not as they're taught in law schools, as they're practiced by workaday lawyers.
Yeah, I don't know that you actually get a top-down even discussion about them being called civil.
No. You just talk about them as litigation, right?
You're just this thing is happening, and I'm looking up these documents.
I'm looking up these documents,
yes.
And
it's yes.
And you read 500 of them, and they all refer to the same case. A whole bunch of them refer to the same case that sets the rules for this kind of motion. So then you read the case, right? If you're curious. And There's a huge amount of that at Legal Times. Then I went, and there was a corollary to that, which is the second point, which is, covering federal investigations. When you cover federal investigations in a serious way, you learn a lot of law, both because there's the law under which they bring charges, whatever that may be, but there's also the law of the conduct of the investigation itself, which is something, by the way, that people in law school almost never study. And
absolutely, they don't at all.
Right, and so notice that this is all stuff that, most law students.
Be clear that litigation is 5%,
not
9% of cases. So most legal documents that are filed or cases that are started never have anything to do with this type of litigation, or they settle. So.
Right. So but in law school, you learn everything from the top, from big decisions down. And this is learning law from the practice up. So then I went to the Washington Post to write legal affairs editorials. And this was a very different legal education. It was, I basically read every Supreme Court decision for 10 years. And you had to read them all. And I read all the DC Circuit opinions too.
Because you have so that makes more sense to me finally now that I knew that you've done that, because you have this fluency in them that I'm always
yeah, I mean, you really learn.
The way that you talk about them reminds me of how I would be if I wrote summaries of all of the things and kind of had a little bit of a memory about all of them.
You have to read, you read them all, and you have to read them all, or at least the first several paragraphs of them all, because you got to figure out which ones you're going to write editorials about, right? Yeah. And sometimes it's obvious because, it's an abortion case and the Washington Post has to weigh in on a major abortion case, right? But sometimes it's non-obvious, right? It's an 8-to-1 opinion in administrative law with that, doesn't get a lot of news coverage, but that the one dissenter thinks is the most outrageous thing he or she's ever seen. And, so you end up reading those pretty carefully. And if you do that over a long period of time, you learn a lot of law. And if you combine that with, by the way, there's a Ken Starr investigation going on, which leads to an impeachment. So you learn a lot about the way a federal investigation under the independent counsel law proceeds, and you learn a lot about the way, the history of impeachment. You end up learning a lot of law, and a lot of it is not learning it. It's bothering to do it in a way that you remember it.
Can we have just I want to talk to Richard, but I just want to have a moment for the fact that what you just said is a lot of law is bothering to remember it. But I think that a lot of law, one of the things that I try to drive home to my, I just had this student in office hours come to me and be like, you taught us this this fox case that was about people chasing the fox onto the beach in 1789, and they chased this fox. It's called Pearson v. Post. It's a very famous case in property law. They chase, and the rule is capture is it's all about capture, but how do you define capture? How do you define discovery of chattels and on an open property like the beach? And there's a whole bunch of things that flow from this case. A whole bunch is really actually kind of downplaying it, but it's a hugely distinct case, and the case means so much more than the very limited property holding about possession, which is that if you have a wild thing and you mortally wound it, or you do something to demonstrate possession, that you have possession of it. And I just feel there was a student sitting in my office hours, and I was and he was lovely, and he was Professor Klonick, you said that the holding of this case didn't matter, and I just it seems people talk about this holding and it does matter, and I was no, the holding matters. Like the legal profession, like, is basically like not built around this holding. Like, it is all about, the holding is one thing, and everything will be facts applied to this holding, like facts applied to this rule. And it was just kind of like this, like he just kind of sat there and was like, and you're always going to have students like this. There's like ones that like just want the rule, they just want to know, they just want to have a black and white kind of thing. And then there's going to be people that kind of like, so a little bit.
And let me just say, without being snotty, that kid might be an excellent lawyer for purposes of advising a client about how to handle his fox. He is unlikely to be a legal scholar of property rights.
Yeah, but it's also kind of like, I just want to say that like you in particular kind of like prove this point, that there's like, that the entire thing is really not about the rule. It's about kind of just like this relationship of that is all very real. And so like you said, like, when did this happen for you that you realized the law was this thing and not this black and white thing? It's like, I kind of don't think you have to go to law school to realize that. Like, it's kind of like it's a bigger philosophic problem of like growing up, that you realize like, oh, look at the pandemic and literally nothing else matters. Like property rights, like my job, like all these things don't matter. All that matters is my kids and my family. Like, that's it. Like, you just have to protect that. And like, there's like, I guess what I'm trying to say is just basically like, these are kind of like these bigger problems. Hi, Richard.
Hello.
Nice hat. Hold on.
Good hat. Yeah, we gotta all have hats.
Got the hat day.
And I think we're gonna get a screenshot of this.
Oh.
Your question, sir.
So, Fox has vowed to fight the $2.7 billion libel suit that Smartmatic has filed against them. And I'm aware that the threshold for libel is high, but in this case, does Fox even have a leg to stand on? And can we see something like the cancellation of Lou Dobbs as a move? I should say Lou Dobbs' show, because Lou Dobbs wasn't canceled. His show was. Can we see that as a move to put a better face on the organization, the sorts of things that they're trying to do to curry favor?
What do you think, Ben?
With whomever?
Well, so I have not looked at the particular... to answer your first question in a way that was not speculative, you'd have to know exactly what was said about Smartmatic on Fox News that is the subject of the complaint. I have not read the complaint. I have not, and so I haven't evaluated that. My atmospheric impression is that all of the right-wing networks, as well as individual hosts on them, like Lou Dobbs, made outrageously false claims about both Dominion and Smartmatic, and that these cases are quite righteous. The standard for libel and defamation with respect to public figures and a publicly traded corporation operating. There's no doubt that it's a public figure.
That's not even in question.
It is
the burden.
Right. It means that the standard of proof is that they have to establish not merely that something was false, but that it was maliciously false, which means that it was done with reckless disregard for the truth. Think about all the way.
New York State jurisdiction?
I don't know where the suit was filed.
I would assume that it's like based in New York City.
Although
but maybe
I don't know where it was filed. So I think and on reckless disregard, every inference that can be made in favor of a defendant corporation will be, at least at the appellate levels. So the burden, as you say, is very high. And I think that Fox News has a problem under that burden. That's my impression of the thing. And And by the way, some of the other networks, Newsmax, really have a problem. So look, I think the
They
history.
don't have Section 230. So.
That's right. They do not have
Sorry.
Section 230.
Sorry.
And they will.
Sorry.
And the pattern in Fox's case is actually pretty well established, which is that unlike more reputable news organizations, they settle these cases. So the New York Times and the Washington Post have a basically position of principle that they will not settle a libel case if they don't think they've libeled somebody. And they spend, have at various times spent very large amounts of money defending libel cases that are expensive to defend to vindicate that principle. Fox News settles, and they settled with, now they also libel people.
Yeah.
So they settled, as Trump would say, bigly with the Seth Rich family. Mm-hmm. But they also engaged in, serious defamation of the Rich family, right? And so I assume that this will settle. I think it will probably settle relatively quickly, because no amount of money that Fox News has to spend to make it go away is too much. The real question, to my mind, is not monetary. It's how embarrassing the statement they will have to issue will be. What do you mean? Well, I mean, if I were Smartmatic, so Smartmatic is a company who this has done real damage to, right? If you're a Republican-leaning state, you now cannot use their machines because, people like Fox News have convinced your voters that they're cheating. So the question is, how do you make that right for a company like Smartmatic? And I think the answer has to be both a very large financial settlement, but also a serious set of admissions by Fox. And the question is, can you do that without really damaging the reputation of the organization? And I think you probably can't. And probably shouldn't be able to, because it should damage your reputation when you do that. So I think it's a very delicate thing. That the imperatives are settle it quickly, make it go away. I don't think there are huge financial impediments to that. They're a very rich corporation with good insurance. But I do think the statement they would have to issue in order to satisfy a company that they've basically tried to destroy and that has to rebuild its business is probably, that's going to be a hard thing to negotiate. And I don't know how you do it.
Well, are they going to lose? Would they lose credibility with that they with such a statement? I mean, their fans aren't going to flee from them, and
what if the requirement are that they take out an ad on their own network and broadcast their own fraud? What they did on their own network on a every night for 10 nights in a row, right? Like, you could imagine Smartmatic being like driving a really hard bargain, less on the damages front than on the rehabilitate us before the audience that you destroyed us in front of.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to say that, I might have had a role in writing one of the most recent Second Circuit opinions on defamation. And it was around Michael Lewis's depiction of a certain individual in his book. What was the name of the book? The Big Money?
The Big Short.
The Big Short. And there were dozens of instances of defamation that were specifically alleged in that opinion. And in that case, and even when sewn together, like, I'm just going to say that, like, it is really hard. It doesn't matter how much of a public figure you are. Like, it is very, very hard to prove defamation in New York. And I don't, like, as, like, a layperson, I don't think that this is, like, it's not here. Ben, do you think it is? Like, I just feel like, am I totally wrong?
So I think without seeing the complaint and knowing exactly who said, like, I would not evaluate a libel case without doing that.
Yes.
My impression, and I don't watch Fox News, so I don't really know what precisely they said about Smartmatic. My impression is, from clips I've seen on Twitter, is that the coverage of both Dominion, particularly Dominion, and Smartmatic was deranged. And, you know, I know enough about libel law to know that deranged does not equal liability, but I think this is going to get taken very seriously at Fox News. And look, a lot of people thought the Riches couldn't recover, and the Riches recovered a lot. And, you know, that's despite the fact that you can't libel the dead, and Seth Rich was dead. So, you know, it's like, I would not want to be Fox's lawyers in this. On the other hand, you know, libel law is built to protect the big, powerful media organization against the small voting machine company. Well,
we should leave it there.
Yeah, you've squandered another hour, as the Car Talks guys have said on In Lieu of Fun.
Oh my God, can we have them on the show?
Didn't one of them just die?
No.
I think one of them just died.
Ben, what the fuck? Why would you tell me this now?
Because you asked, can we have them on the show?
One of the brothers, the Car Talks brothers, died? Oh,
yeah,
no.
Pretty recently.
A few years ago. Okay, apparently not that
Yeah,
recently.
but because you don't read the news, you don't know these things,
just
Kate.
like, I feel like I do read the news, Ben. Like, I just don't read the news about Trump. It's like mostly like I tried to like have a break from that. Oh, that's so sad. Okay, do we cheat him in how? Oh, that's really sad. Okay, maybe Ray will come on.
On that cheerful note, guess what tomorrow is, Kate?
Just a Sunday?
No, tomorrow is Mystery Guest Sunday, and guess what?
Is it
It is your Mystery Guest Day, except that I'm taking it off your shoulders, and I am bringing a mystery guest because
glad.
Because you're exhausted. And
I was also thinking that maybe we could do tomorrow and actually plan the show, because we just ended up talking about like journalism this time.
Yeah, it's all right. You know.
But it was like, I think it was great. I want a flag in the future. I would love to spend a Saturday quizzing you about your, I would love for you to give your talk about how to write an op-ed.
Oh, I can do that.
Oh, God, it would be so good. I think so many people would benefit from that.
But wait a minute. There's one, before we break, there is one planning of the show matter that we are going to take care of today.
Okay.
Because your New Yorker piece is coming out on Wednesday, right?
No, Friday.
Friday. And
do you want to talk to me on Friday?
And so, you know, we did that Kate interviews Ben Day.
When did we do that?
We did it when DHS was spying on me. Yeah.
When they were
so now it's like Kate has a, you know, 1,000,000-word article in the New Yorker about the oversight board that she spent 2 years on, and so I think it should Friday should be a Ben interviews Kate day.
But we can maybe do Friday as Ben. We'll like pencil it. Let's pencil it in.
All right, well, that's what we're gonna do.
I don't know if I love it.
I don't think you have to love it. I think you have to comply with it.
I know.
All right, we are going to leave it there. We will be back with my mystery guest, Taylor Swift, 22 hours and 49 minutes from now. And until then, we don't have fun anymore, but we do have hats, and we have endless anxieties about articles that are forthcoming.